Everything you will hear in this video really happened. The events, locations, and crimes are real. Some parts may be dramatized, but their content is documented and verified. Some descriptions may be disturbing, as reality and death show no regard for sensitivities. Welcome to Hide the Evidence.
The morning of April 1st arrived in Buckwheat with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes travelers feel blessed by fortune itself. Liz and Froon and Chris Kremers woke in their host family's comfortable home, surrounded by the cheerful sounds of a Panamanian household beginning its day. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the rooms, mixing with the cool mountain air that gave this highland town its reputation as a paradise of eternal spring. For two young Dutch women barely into their 20s, the world seemed to unfold before them like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. They had arrived in Buckwheat only days earlier, their backpacks heavy with optimism and their cameras ready to document what they imagined would be the adventure of a lifetime. Both women came from the Netherlands, that famously flat country where the highest points barely qualify as hills, where nature has been tamed and organized into neat parcels, where getting lost means perhaps taking a wrong turn on a bicycle path before emerging onto another well-marked road. Their homeland was a place of order, of predictability, where wilderness existed only in carefully managed nature reserves with visitor centers and designated trails. Panama represented something entirely different, though neither woman fully grasped just how different until it was far too late. Liz, 22 years old, had recently completed her studies and possessed the kind of bright, eager personality that made friends easily. Her companion Chris, 21, shared that same openness to experience, that same confidence that comes from growing up in a safe, prosperous country where systems work and help is always nearby. They had planned this trip as a combination of volunteer work and travel, a chance to improve their Spanish, experience Latin American culture, and collect stories they would tell for years to come. Their families had been supportive, perhaps with the usual parental concerns, but nothing that suggested genuine danger. After all, Buckwheat was known as a tourist destination, popular with retirees and hikers, a place where guidebooks promised scenic trails and welcoming locals. The Pianista Trail had been recommended to them as a must-do hike, a relatively easy walk that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains and valleys. Local information suggested it was well-traveled, suitable for casual hikers, the kind of trail where you might encounter other tourists and perhaps share a friendly greeting before continuing on your way. The women prepared with the casual confidence of people who had never encountered real wilderness. They wore comfortable clothes, carried water, and brought their cameras to document the experience. What they did not bring was a detailed map, a GPS device, a compass, emergency supplies, or any real understanding of what jungle terrain actually meant. The trail began innocuously enough, winding through pleasant countryside where farms and small properties bordered the path. Other hikers had walked this way countless times, and the route showed the wear of regular use. Liz and Chris took photographs of each other, smiling broadly, their faces reflecting nothing but joy and anticipation. The images captured that morning show two healthy, happy young women at the beginning of what should have been a memorable day hike. Their body language radiated confidence and excitement. They posed at viewpoints, admired the vistas, and moved steadily upward along the trail as it climbed into higher elevations. The path took them through changing vegetation as they gained altitude, the cultivated lands giving way to more natural forest. The views expanded, offering glimpses of the valley below and the mountains beyond. They reached what locals considered the Mirador, the lookout point that served as the unofficial turnaround spot for most casual hikers. Here, the trail technically continued, but it also began to change character. The well-maintained path started to become less defined, the markers less obvious. For experienced hikers familiar with wilderness areas, this transition would have signaled a boundary, a point where casual tourism ended and serious trekking began. But Lissen and Kreese had no framework for reading these subtle signs. In their experience, trails were trails, marked and maintained, leading somewhere and then leading back. The concept of a path simply dissolving into jungle, of terrain becoming genuinely dangerous, of being unable to find your way back to civilization, belonged to adventure movies, not to a pleasant day hike in a tourist destination. They made the decision that thousands of hikers make every year, the choice that usually results in nothing more than a longer walk and tired legs, but sometimes, in certain places, under particular circumstances, leads to catastrophe. They continued beyond the safe zone. The photographs from this period show the gradual transformation of their hike. The images become less frequent, suggesting they were focused more on walking than documenting. The terrain visible in the backgrounds grows denser, more enclosed. The easy visibility of the lower trail gives way to the characteristic claustrophobia of tropical forest, where vegetation presses in from all sides and the canopy above filters sunlight into a green-tinted dimness. The path, such as it was, became harder to follow. In jungle terrain, especially in areas with frequent rainfall, trails can disappear with shocking speed. What looks like a clear route can suddenly fork, or seem to vanish entirely, or branch into multiple game trails that lead nowhere humans want to go. The women pressed on, perhaps thinking they would reach another viewpoint, perhaps simply curious about what lay ahead, perhaps not yet concerned because they could still see traces of a path. This is how people get lost, not through dramatic wrong turns or obvious mistakes, but through a series of small decisions that seem reasonable at the time. Walk a little further. Check around that bend. Try to find where the trail continues. Each choice taking them deeper into terrain that became progressively more difficult to navigate, more disorienting, more dangerous. By early afternoon, their situation had shifted from adventure to uncertainty. The exact moment when they realized they were lost cannot be pinpointed, but the phone records provide a stark marker. At 1:39 in the afternoon, the first emergency call was attempted. The phone tried to connect to 112, the European emergency number they would have known from home. No signal reached through the dense canopy and the remote location. They tried 911, the American emergency number that also worked in Panama. Again, nothing. The phones registered the attempts but could not complete the connections. This moment represents the invisible boundary between two worlds. Behind them, though they did not yet know how far, lay civilization, safety, rescue. Ahead and around them stretched terrain that had swallowed people before, that could hide a person 10 feet from a searcher, that offered 1,000 ways to become injured, exhausted, or fatally disoriented. The sun, which had seemed so pleasant that morning, began its inevitable descent toward the horizon. In tropical regions near the equator, twilight is brief, a short transition between day and absolute darkness. The women, accustomed to the long, gradual evenings of northern European summers, would not have anticipated how quickly light would fail them. They continued to move, trying to find their way back, trying to find any landmark they recognized, trying to reach a point where their phones might connect. The camera captured a few more images, including one that would later become iconic. A photograph taken at the top of a slope looking down into dense jungle, the last image taken in daylight. The timestamp read shortly after 2 in the afternoon. After this, the camera fell silent for hours. As the sun dropped below the mountains, the forest transformed into something alien and terrifying. Darkness in jungle terrain is not like darkness in populated areas, where ambient light from distant sources provides some visibility, where eyes adjust and shapes become distinguishable. This was the profound, disorienting blackness of deep forest, where the canopy blocks even starlight, where every direction looks identical, where moving risks injury with every step. The temperature, pleasant during the day, began to drop. The women, dressed for a day hike, had no protection against the cold, no shelter, no light source except their phones and camera flash. The phone records show they tried again to call for help as darkness fell. The devices registered the attempts, brief moments of hope that died when no connection formed. They were alone in the darkness, somewhere in thousands of acres of mountainous jungle, with no one knowing exactly where they had gone or when to expect them back. The adventure had ended. The survival ordeal had begun. The phone records tell a story more eloquent than any witness testimony, a digital chronicle of desperation measured in battery percentages and failed connection attempts. In the hours after darkness consumed the pianist's trail, Liss and Froon and Chris Kremers became prisoners of a night that would stretch far beyond a single terrifying evening. The pattern of phone activations reveals the rhythm of their ordeal, each power-on representing a moment of decision, of hope, of calculated survival strategy that would ultimately prove insufficient against the jungle's indifference. The first night brought a flurry of emergency call attempts. Between the initial call at 1:39 in the afternoon and the deepening darkness of evening, the phones were activated repeatedly, trying both 112 and 911 in desperate succession. Each attempt lasted only seconds before the devices registered no service, and the calls failed. The women were methodical at first, trying one number, then the other, then waiting before trying again. This pattern suggests they were still thinking clearly, still conserving battery life, still believing that rescue might be imminent if they could just make contact with the outside world. But the jungle offered no signal, no connection to the civilization that existed just miles away, but might as well have been on another planet. The density of the forest canopy, the mountainous terrain, the remote location, all conspired to create a dead zone where modern technology became useless decoration. The phones, which had been lifelines and entertainment and connection to home, transformed into cruel reminders of how close help theoretically was and how impossibly distant in practice. As the first night deepened, the pattern changed. The phones were turned off between attempts, a conscious decision to preserve battery life that reveals the women understood they were facing an extended ordeal. This was not a simple matter of waiting for dawn and walking back to town. They were lost, genuinely lost, in terrain where visibility extended only as far as their phone screens could illuminate. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. For young women from the Netherlands, where true wilderness does not exist, where being lost means perhaps wandering an unfamiliar neighborhood before finding a landmark or asking directions, this situation represented a complete departure from any experience their lives had prepared them for. The darkness in tropical jungle is not merely an absence of light, but a presence unto itself, a thick, disorienting void that transforms familiar actions into dangerous gambles. Every movement risks a fall, a twisted ankle, a collision with unseen obstacles. The sounds of the forest at night, the calls of nocturnal animals, the rustle of vegetation, the distant sounds that might be water or wind or something else entirely, all combine to create an environment of constant tension. For Lissen and Chris, accustomed to the quiet, ordered nights of Dutch towns where streetlights banish darkness and help is always a phone call away. This must have been psychologically devastating. The phone records show they did not simply sit and wait. Throughout the night, the devices were activated at intervals, suggesting the women were moving, trying to find better signal, attempting to navigate by the faint light of their screens. This decision, while understandable, represented one of the most fatal mistakes in wilderness survival. The cardinal rule when lost is to stay put, to make yourself findable, to conserve energy and avoid injury. But this rule assumes you know you are the subject of a search, that people are looking for you, that staying in one place will eventually result in rescue. Lissen and Kreese had no reason to believe anyone was searching yet. They had been expected to return that evening, but their host family might not raise alarm until the next day. They did not know that staying put was their best option. Every instinct, every impulse of their modern, problem-solving minds told them to find a way out, to keep moving, to reach a point where their phones would work. Each step they took in the darkness, however, likely carried them further from the trail, deeper into terrain where even experienced guides struggled to navigate. The second day brought a new pattern. The phone records show fewer call attempts but more strategic timing. The women were learning, adapting, rationing their battery life with increasing care. They tried emergency calls primarily during what they must have hoped were optimal times, perhaps when they reached higher ground or clearings. The attempts continued to fail. No signal penetrated the jungle's embrace. The phones registered each attempt, logged each failure, created a digital record of hope repeatedly denied. On the third day, something changed. The phone records show a wrong PIN entry on one of the devices, then another. These failed attempts to unlock a phone suggest something deeply troubling. One woman was trying to access the other's device, entering the code incorrectly in what might have been panic, confusion, or desperation. The implications are heartbreaking. Was one woman injured, unable to operate her own phone? Was she unconscious, leaving her companion to try accessing both devices to maximize chances of connection? Was she already dead, and her friend attempting to use every available resource to call for help? The wrong PIN entries haunt the digital record like ghost fingerprints, evidence of a crisis within the crisis, a moment when the situation deteriorated from desperate to catastrophic. Internet theorists would later seize on these entries as evidence of foul play, suggesting someone else had the phones and was trying to access them. But the simpler, sadder explanation aligns with everything else in the record. Two friends, sharing resources, one trying to help the other, making mistakes under unimaginable stress and exhaustion. On the fourth night, the camera suddenly activated after days of silence. Between the hours of 1 and 4 in the morning, 90 photos were taken in rapid succession. These images would become some of the most analyzed and misinterpreted evidence in the entire case. Viewed without context, they appear bizarre, even sinister. Dark shots of treetops, rocks, the back of someone's head caught in harsh flash, seemingly random angles that show nothing clearly, images that look like the work of someone panicking or being forced to take photographs against their will. But understanding the reality of their situation transforms these mysterious images into something far more heartbreaking. The women were using the camera flash as a flashlight, the only source of illumination they had left as phone batteries dwindled. Each photograph represents a desperate attempt to see their surroundings, to navigate in absolute darkness, to avoid falls or obstacles. The images of treetops might have been attempts to see the canopy, to find breaks that might indicate clearings or paths. The rocks could have been landmarks they were trying to document, reference points in terrain where everything looked identical. Some photographs show what appears to be the back of someone's head, hair visible in the harsh light of the flash. These images are particularly haunting, suggesting one woman was photographing the other, perhaps trying to document their situation, perhaps attempting to create evidence of their location, perhaps simply seeking comfort in seeing a human face in the overwhelming darkness. The angles are awkward because the photographer was exhausted, injured, operating in pitch blackness with only the brief illumination of each flash to guide her. Other images show what might be attempts at signaling. Photographs pointed upward through the canopy could have been efforts to create visible flashes that might be seen by aircraft or searchers. A desperate attempt to make their presence known to a world that seemed to have forgotten them. The seemingly random nature of the photographs reflects not chaos, but the reality of trying to use a camera flash to navigate terrain where every step is treacherous and every direction looks the same. The phone records continue their grim chronicle. By the fifth day, battery life was becoming critical. The devices were activated less frequently, each power-on representing a calculated decision about when to try for help versus when to preserve the remaining charge. The call attempts continued to fail. No signal ever connected. The women were shouting into a void that offered no response, no acknowledgement, no hope of rescue. The pattern of activations suggests they were still moving, still trying to find a way out or a signal. This continued movement, while understandable, sealed their fate. Each step took them further from the trail, deeper into terrain that became progressively more difficult. The jungle does not reveal its dangers obviously. A slope that looks manageable can hide loose soil that gives way. A stream that appears shallow can conceal deep pools. Vegetation that seems passable can be impenetrable. Without experience, without proper equipment, without the knowledge that comes from understanding wilderness, every decision becomes a potential fatal error. The final phone activations came days later, brief power-ons that attempted no calls, as if someone was checking for signal out of habit or desperate hope rather than genuine expectation. The batteries were dying, the last connection to the modern world fading with each percentage point of charge depleted. When the phones finally went dark, Listen and Crease were truly alone, cut off not just from rescue but from any ability to document their situation, to leave messages, to maintain even the illusion of connection to home. The digital record ends there, but the ordeal continued. How long they survived, what they experienced in those final days, remains unknown. The phones and camera captured only fragments, brief windows into an experience that stretched across days of fear, exhaustion, injury, and the slow realization that rescue was not coming, that they would not find their way out, that the jungle would claim them as it had claimed others before. The voices in the dark, calling for help that never came, eventually fell silent. The trail had disappeared, and with it, any path back to the lives they had left behind that bright April morning. 10 days after Listen Froon and Crease Kremers failed to return from their hike, the search efforts intensified across the mountainous terrain surrounding Buckwheat. Local guides, police, volunteers, and eventually specialized search teams combed the Pianista Trail and the vast wilderness beyond, calling names that would never be answered, looking for signs that the jungle had already begun to erase. The search was hampered by the same factors that had doomed the women: dense vegetation that reduced visibility to mere feet, treacherous terrain where footing was uncertain, and the sheer scale of wilderness where two people could vanish as completely as if they had never existed. Weeks passed with no discoveries, no clues, nothing but the growing certainty that whatever had happened to the Dutch women, the outcome was almost certainly tragic. Then, On June 14th, more than 2 months after the disappearance, a local woman found a backpack near a riverbank in the area of Alto Romero, miles from where the women had last been seen. The backpack was blue, recognizable, and remarkably intact considering the time elapsed and the harsh environment. Inside, searchers found items that would become the only witnesses to the fate of Lissen and Kreese. 2 phones, a camera, some cash, and personal items, all in surprisingly good condition. The discovery was both breakthrough and mystery. How had the backpack traveled so far from the trail? Why was it relatively undamaged while its owners had vanished? The condition of the items seemed inconsistent with months of exposure to tropical weather, leading immediately to speculation about whether the backpack had been placed there deliberately, whether someone had kept it and then returned it, whether foul play had been involved. The Internet, which had been following the case with increasing interest, seized upon these questions with an enthusiasm that would transform a tragic hiking accident into an elaborate conspiracy theory. In the days following the backpack's discovery, more remains were found scattered along the riverbanks and in the water. Bone fragments, identified through DNA testing as belonging to both women, painted a grim picture of their fate. A pelvis, a rib, foot bone still partially contained in a boot, scattered pieces that represented all that remained of 2 young lives. The remains were decomposed, fragmented, dispersed across a significant area by water and time, and the efficient processes by which nature reclaims organic matter. The official investigation concluded what experienced wilderness experts had suspected from the beginning: death by misadventure. The women had become lost, likely sustained injuries from falls in the difficult terrain, and succumbed to exposure, exhaustion, dehydration, and the cumulative effects of days without food, shelter, or medical care. The scattered remains were consistent with bodies that had been in tropical water for months, subject to decomposition, scavenger activity, and the mechanical action of flowing water tumbling bones downstream. The condition of the backpack could be explained by it being caught in vegetation or shallow water, protected from the worst of the elements, while the bodies themselves were exposed to far harsher conditions. But the Internet rejected this explanation with a fervor that revealed more about human psychology than about the actual evidence. Online forums, YouTube channels, podcasts, and social media discussions transformed the case into something far more sinister than a hiking tragedy. Every piece of evidence that seemed unusual became proof of conspiracy. The relatively good condition of the backpack meant someone had kept it. The scattered remains suggested bodies had been dismembered. The nighttime photographs were coded messages or evidence of captivity. The wrong PIN entries proved someone else had the phones. The bones themselves became a focal point of conspiracy. Some appeared bleached, lighter in color than others, which Internet detectives claimed was evidence of chemical treatment, proof that someone had deliberately cleaned the bones to remove evidence. The reality, explained by forensic experts and ignored by conspiracy theorists, was far simpler. Bones exposed to tropical sun, water, and environmental conditions bleach naturally. The variation in color reflected different exposure levels, different positions in water or on rocks, the natural processes of decomposition in a harsh environment. There was nothing mysterious about it, nothing that required human intervention to explain. The taxi driver who had dropped the women near the trailhead died in an accident months after their disappearance. To conspiracy theorists, this was too convenient to be coincidence. He must have known something, must have been involved, must have been silenced. The fact that traffic accidents are tragically common in Panama, that the driver's death had no apparent connection to the case, that there was no evidence linking him to anything beyond providing transportation. None of this mattered. The narrative demanded a villain, and the taxi driver, conveniently dead and unable to defend himself, fit the role. Elaborate theories emerged involving drug cartels, human traffickers, local criminals, and cover-ups by Panamanian authorities. The women had been kidnapped, held captive, murdered, their bodies disposed of to hide evidence of crimes. The phones and camera had been kept as trophies or to extract information. The backpack had been planted to mislead investigators. Every detail that didn't fit this narrative was dismissed as part of the cover-up. Every detail that did fit was presented as smoking gun evidence. The psychological appeal of these theories is understandable. A random hiking accident, two young women making understandable mistakes and dying slowly in the jungle, offers no satisfying narrative arc. There is no villain to hate, no justice to pursue, no clear moment where intervention could have changed the outcome. It is simply sad, wasteful, and terrifyingly random. Conspiracy theories provide structure, meaning, and the comforting illusion that such tragedies are preventable if only we identify and stop the bad actors responsible. But the evidence, examined without the need for dramatic narrative, tells a consistent and heartbreaking story. Two inexperienced hikers ventured beyond safe boundaries in terrain they did not understand. They became lost as darkness fell. They made the common mistake of continuing to move rather than staying put. They sustained injuries, likely from falls in the treacherous terrain. They used their phones and camera in increasingly desperate attempts to call for help and navigate in darkness. One woman may have been more seriously injured than the other, explaining the wrong PIN entries as her companion tried to access both devices. They survived for days, possibly more than a week, before succumbing to exposure, dehydration, injuries, and exhaustion. Their bodies, unrecovered for months, decomposed in tropical conditions. Water scattered the remains. Scavengers, from insects to larger animals, did what scavengers do. The bones bleached in sun and water. The backpack, caught in vegetation or deposited in a protected spot, survived in better condition than the bodies themselves. There is nothing in this sequence that requires human malice, nothing that cannot be explained by the well-documented processes of decomposition and the harsh realities of jungle survival. The nighttime photographs, so mysterious to internet theorists, are actually the most human part of the evidence. They show two people using every resource available to them, turning a camera flash into a flashlight, trying desperately to see in absolute darkness, attempting to navigate terrain where every step risked injury. The seemingly random angles reflect the reality of exhaustion, fear, and the disorientation of operating in pitch blackness. These are not mysterious images requiring elaborate explanation. They are exactly what you would expect from people in crisis, using technology in desperate, practical ways as hope faded and batteries died. The case of Lis and Froon and Chris Kremers reveals an uncomfortable truth about human nature and our relationship with tragedy. We resist simple explanations even when evidence supports them. We create elaborate narratives because randomness and accident feel insufficient to explain the loss of young lives. We need villains because villains can be fought, stopped, punished. Nature cannot be punished. The jungle does not care about justice or meaning or the stories we tell ourselves. The most terrifying aspect of this case is not what happened, but how easily it could happen to anyone. The women made no dramatically foolish decisions. They hiked a trail that was supposed to be safe. They ventured slightly beyond marked boundaries, something thousands of hikers do every year without consequence. They got lost, which happens. They tried to find their way back, which is what anyone would do. The cascade of small decisions and unfortunate circumstances that led to their deaths could be replicated by any tourist, any hiker, anyone who underestimates wilderness and overestimates their ability to handle unexpected situations. The Internet's transformation of this tragedy into conspiracy theory serves a psychological function. It allows people to believe that such fates befall only those who encounter evil, not those who simply make mistakes. It suggests that by avoiding cartels and criminals, we can avoid similar outcomes. This is comforting but false. The jungle killed Lisan and Kreese, not people, not conspiracy. Just nature, indifferent and efficient, doing what nature does to those unprepared for its realities. The Pianista Trail still winds through the mountains above Buckwheat, still attracts hikers seeking spectacular views, still presents itself as a manageable day hike suitable for casual tourists. The path has not changed since April 2014, but the story of what happened to Lisan Froon and Kreese Kremers has transformed how people perceive this landscape. What once seemed like benign wilderness now carries the weight of tragedy, a reminder that nature operates by rules fundamentally different from the ordered, predictable environments most modern humans inhabit. The case reveals a profound gap between our contemporary, connected existence and the ancient reality of wilderness that persists in places like the Panamanian jungle. We live in a world where GPS can pinpoint our location to within meters, where cell phones connect us to help with a single call, where rescue services can reach most locations within hours. This technological safety net creates an illusion of control, a sense that we have transcended the vulnerabilities that plagued our ancestors. We forget that this protection extends only as far as infrastructure reaches, that beyond certain boundaries, we are as exposed and fragile as humans have always been. Lisan and Kreese embodied this modern disconnect. They came from the Netherlands, a nation that represents the ultimate triumph of human organization over nature. The Dutch have literally reclaimed land from the sea, have engineered their entire country into a managed landscape where wilderness exists only in carefully controlled reserves. The highest point in the Netherlands rises barely 300 meters above sea level. There are no jungles, no mountains, no places where you can walk for days without encountering roads, towns, or people. Getting lost in the Netherlands means perhaps taking a wrong turn on a bicycle path before emerging onto another well-marked route within minutes. This background provided no framework for understanding what jungle terrain actually means. The density of vegetation in tropical forests creates a claustrophobia that must be experienced to be comprehended. Visibility extends only feet in any direction. The canopy above blocks not just sunlight but any sense of direction or landmark. Every direction looks identical, an endless repetition of green vegetation, brown earth, and the occasional glimpse of sky through leaves. Paths that seem clear can vanish within steps. What appears to be a trail can be an animal track leading nowhere. The disorienting sameness makes navigation nearly impossible without experience and proper equipment. The speed of nightfall near the equator compounds these dangers. In northern Europe, twilight stretches for hours during summer months, providing ample time to adjust to darkness, to find shelter, to make decisions about whether to continue or stop. Near the equator, day transitions to night in less than 30 minutes. The sun drops below the horizon and darkness arrives with shocking finality. For Lisan and Kreese, accustomed to long, gradual evenings, this rapid transition would have been disorienting and terrifying, leaving them in absolute darkness with no preparation or warning. The jungle at night becomes a different world entirely. Sounds that are merely background noise during daylight transform into sources of anxiety and fear. The calls of nocturnal animals, the rustle of unseen creatures, the crack of branches, all take on sinister significance when you cannot see their sources. The temperature drops, and without proper clothing or shelter, hypothermia becomes a real danger even in tropical regions. The combination of cold, darkness, fear, and exhaustion creates a psychological state where rational decision-making becomes nearly impossible. The women's decision to continue moving rather than staying put reflects this impaired judgment. Every survival guide emphasizes the importance of remaining in one location when lost, of making yourself findable rather than wandering further into unknown terrain. But this advice assumes you know you are the subject of a search, that people are looking for you, that staying put will eventually result in rescue. Lissen and Kreese had no reason to believe anyone was searching yet. Their instinct to find a way out, to keep moving toward what they hoped would be civilization, was entirely human and entirely wrong. Each step they took in the darkness likely carried them further from the trail and deeper into terrain that became progressively more dangerous. The jungle does not reveal its hazards obviously. A slope that looks manageable in limited visibility can hide loose soil that gives way beneath weight. A stream that appears shallow can conceal deep pools or strong currents. Vegetation that seems passable can be impenetrable or hide drops and obstacles. Without experience reading terrain, without understanding how to assess risks in wilderness, every decision becomes a gamble with potentially fatal consequences. The specific dangers of the Panamanian jungle are numerous and cumulative. Dehydration occurs rapidly in tropical heat, especially when hiking and stressed. The women had water initially, but once their supplies ran out, finding safe drinking water would have been nearly impossible without knowledge of what sources were contaminated. Drinking from streams or rivers in tropical regions risks parasites and bacteria that can cause severe illness. Injuries from falls on slippery terrain, from thorns, and sharp vegetation from insect bites all compound over time without medical treatment. Hypothermia, counterintuitive in a tropical location, becomes a serious threat at night and at higher elevations. Wet clothing from rain, river crossings, or simply humidity, combined with dropping temperatures and exhaustion, can lower core body temperature to dangerous levels. The women were dressed for a day hike in pleasant weather, not for extended exposure to elements. As days passed without food, their bodies would have lost the ability to generate heat, making hypothermia increasingly likely even in relatively mild conditions. The psychological toll of being lost in such conditions cannot be overstated. The constant fear, the repeated disappointment of failed rescue attempts, the growing realization that help was not coming, all create a mental state of despair that makes physical survival even more difficult. The phone records and photographs suggest the women maintained hope and continued trying to save themselves for days. But eventually, the combination of physical deterioration and psychological exhaustion would have made further effort impossible. What haunts people about this case is not the exotic location or unusual circumstances, but the terrifying proximity to ordinary experience. Anyone who has hiked, traveled, or explored unfamiliar places can imagine that moment when confidence turns to concern. You realize you are not quite sure which way you came from. The trail you were following seems to have vanished. The landmarks you thought you would recognize are nowhere to be seen. That flutter of anxiety in your chest as you understand you might actually be lost, that this might not resolve itself in a few minutes of retracing steps. For most people, this moment passes. You find the trail, recognize a landmark, Encounter other hikers who point you in the right direction. The anxiety becomes an anecdote, a brief scare that adds excitement to the story of your hike. But for Listen and Crease, that moment did not pass. The concern became fear, the fear became panic, and the panic became the slow realization that they were in genuine danger with no clear way to save themselves. This progression from ordinary experience to catastrophe is what makes the case so unsettling. It could happen to anyone. The human need for narrative closure explains why conspiracy theories flourish around this case. A simple hiking accident, two intelligent women making understandable mistakes and dying slowly from exposure and injury, provides no satisfying story arc. There is no villain to hate, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where heroic intervention could have changed the outcome. It is simply sad, wasteful, and random. Our minds resist this randomness, seeking patterns and meaning even where none exist. But the most likely explanation, the one supported by evidence and consistent with wilderness survival realities, is actually more horrifying than any conspiracy because it is so preventable and so utterly human. Two young women, excited about their adventure, made a simple decision to walk a bit further than they should have. They got lost in terrain they did not understand. They made survival choices that seemed reasonable but were wrong. They died slowly, desperately trying to signal for help that never came, their bodies eventually claimed by the efficient processes by which nature recycles organic matter. There is no mystery here, only tragedy. No conspiracy, only the harsh reality that wilderness does not care about your plans, your potential, or your life. The jungle operates by rules that predate human civilization and will persist long after our cities crumble. It does not require malice to be deadly. It simply is, indifferent to human presence, efficient at erasing those who enter unprepared. The line between a memorable adventure and a tragedy can be as thin as a single footstep off the marked trail. This is the lesson of Listen Froon and Crease Kremers, a lesson written in phone records and photographs, in scattered remains and unanswered questions. Nature does not negotiate, does not offer second chances, does not respond to desperation or deserve. When the trail disappears, when darkness falls, when you realize you are truly lost, all the technology and intelligence and good intentions in the world may not be enough to save you. The wilderness remains, patient and permanent, waiting for the next person who underestimates its power and overestimates their ability to survive its indifference.